Hello, and welcome to our webinar, STEMinist Reads, a feminist reading list for grades pre-K through 12. I'm Sarah Hunter, adult books editor, or books for youth editor at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. Links to today's slide presentation and title list were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. You can also download the slides and title list by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Last but not least, Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned above. From there, you can select Show or Hide Subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Settings. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Rachel Weiss. Rachel is a manager in Penguin Young Readers School and Library Marketing Department. She has been on a mission in the last year to convince everyone she knows that Ted Lasso is the perfect feminist TV show. We'll also hear from Summer Ogata. Summer is a senior manager in Penguin Young Readers School and Library Marketing Department. She is an avid watcher of women's sports, especially soccer, and has learned more from reading picture books and biographies than she did in the last 4 years of college. And we'll hear from Chelsea Clinton, author of SHE Persisted in Science. We'll begin the program with Rachel and Summer.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. We are going to both start and end this webinar with the SHE Persisted series. So Grace, if we go to the next slide. I guess I should also say I'm Rachel. This is the disembodied voice that you're hearing right now. So this first slide we're going to be talking about are the SHE Persisted picture books, starting with the very first SHE Persisted, which came out just 3 months after Mitch McConnell criticized Elizabeth Warren for speaking in 2017. This picture book series has taken on a whole life of its own. After that first installment, we went around the world and then into the sports arena, which is always a good one to revisit at any time. But now that we are watching the Winter Olympics happening is especially great right now. And this year we are hitting up the STEM fields. You'll hear more about the SHE Persisted in Science book from the author Chelsea Clinton in a bit. But for now, let me tell you who's being profiled in this book. We have features on Florence Nightingale, Rebecca Lee Crumpler, Inez Enriqueta Julieta Mejia, Grace Hopper, Rosalind Franklin, Gladys West, Jane Goodall, who is my personal favorite, Flossie Wongstall, Temple Grandin, Zaha Hadid, Ellen Ochoa, Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha, and Mary Copney, and Autumn Pelletier, Greta Thunberg, and Wanjari Wathuti. Next slide. And all of these books are also published in Spanish as well as English, and we are so excited to expand the reach of the series with the Spanish language publications. Next slide, and over to Summer.
All right, so hello. This is the disembodied voice of Summer. I didn't realize that both Rachel and my bios is going to mention soccer in like a strange way, because Ted Lasso. So that's exciting. So these SHE Persisted picture books that Rachel mentioned are a great introduction to the many amazing and fascinating women. But what if readers want a little more information about each subject? Enter the SHE Persisted chapter book series. In this series, Chelsea Clinton recruited a star-studded list of authors, including some authors like Andrea Davis Pinkney, to Kekla Magoon, Deborah Heiligman, and Renee Watson, to write short and easy to understand biographies of these incredible women. This series kicked off in 2021 with 13 titles, including Harriet Tubman, one of the most successful, determined, and well-known conductors of the Underground Railroad, Claudette Colvin, a 15-year-old Black girl who refused to give up her bus seat in Montgomery, Alabama, Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, Virginia Apgar, a physician and humanitarian best known for her development of the Apgar score, Nellie Bly, a journalist and one of the first investigative reporters, Sonia Sotomayor, the first Latina Supreme Court Justice, Florence Griffith Joyner, 3-time Olympic gold medalist in track and field. And now I'll pass it over to Rachel to share the rest of them.
Yep. We also have Ruby Bridges, who is the first Black student to integrate schools in New Orleans, Louisiana. Clara Lemlich, a Ukrainian immigrant who made a stand for workers' rights in New York City. Margaret Chase Smith, the first woman to serve in both the House and the Senate. Maria Tallchief, who was America's first prima ballerina. Helen Keller, who is one of the most well-known disability activists. Oprah Winfrey, who went after her dreams to become a media superstar and household name. Coretta Scott King, who, like her husband, was an incredible civil rights activist and leader, as well as a singer and author. And the most recent installment in the series that came out earlier this month, Wangari Maathai, who founded the Greenbelt movement and received a Nobel Peace Prize for her work. Next slide.
And that's not all. The years of Persisterhood continue with even more figures. As you can see, the pub months on the side, we have coming out later this year, Temple Grandin, the world-renowned scientist, animal behavior expert, and autism spokesperson. One that I'm super excited about because I'm actually from the state of Hawaii, Patsy Mink, who was the first woman of color and the first Asian American woman elected to Congress. She represented the state of Hawaii. Marian Anderson, a Black opera singer who broke down racial barriers. Malala Yousafzai, a Pakistani, I'm sure you've heard of Malala, but she's a Pakistani activist for female education. Diana Taurasi, a WNBA star and 5-time Olympic gold medalist. And Wilma Mankeller, the first woman principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. Maya Lin, another one that I'm super excited about. She created the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial, and Rosalind Franklin. So we have those coming out soon. And next.
Okay, so now on to the title of this webinar, STEMinist Reads. I hope everyone loves that. I guess it's a pun or a portmanteau. I don't know the technical name, but these books specifically talk about women in STEM. So the ones on this slide are definitely for your younger readers. We've got a selection of board books with the Little Environmentalist series, picture books, and a few chapter books as well. So the Little Environmentalist series and Saving American Beach are all nonfiction about incredible women who have worked to preserve parts of the planet. We also have Fatima's Great Outdoors, which is a fictionalized story about an immigrant girl and her family enjoying nature. This one is so important for any student and patron, but particularly Brown and Black students and patrons to be able to see themselves reflected in nature. Then we have the Jada Jones series by Kelly Starling Lyons. This series is wrapping up in 2022 with the 6th installment, and all 6 books follow Jada, who's a young Black girl who loves all parts of science. So from the earth sciences and geology to chemistry and more. Then finally on here, we have Who is Greta Thunberg? I think we all know Greta at this point, but your young readers might not, in which case this is a great introduction to the teenage activist who is calling governments to pay attention to the fight against climate change. Next slide.
And now we'll introduce some STEMinist reads for slightly older readers. A lot of these fall in the middle grade, kind of ages 8 to 12, and then a little bit into middle school as well. So we have Dream Big in the middle, on the left-hand side, kind of in the middle. So from the age of 4, Abigail Harrison knew she wanted to go to space. At age 11, she sat down and wrote out a plan, not just for how to become an astronaut, but how to be the first astronaut to set foot on Mars. With a degree in biology, internships at NASA, and a national organization founded to help kids reach for the stars themselves. Astronaut Abby, as she is called, is well on her way to achieving her dreams, and she wants to help others do the same. Then Star Child, in the middle on the top row. This is a biography in both verse and prose of Octavia Butler, and it was written by the incredible Edie Savoy, who was actually mentored by Octavia herself. Octavia was born into the space race, the Red Scare, and the dawning civil rights movement, and experienced an American childhood that shaped her into the groundbreaking science fiction storyteller whose novels continue to challenge and delight readers 15 years after her death. And this book has received 4-star reviews. And Maya and the Robot, which is the first one on the top left of the page, written by Eve L. Ewing, who is a Chicago-based award-winning author and sociologist of education, whose research is focused on social inequality and urban policy. This middle grade novel is about a forgotten homemade robot who comes to life just when aspiring 5th grade scientist Maya needs both a friend and a science fair project.
Maya and the Robot is so much fun, and it has some great illustrations too. I really love that book. So the first one I'll talk about is Eat Bugs Project Startup. There are 2 in the series. The first one is pictured on the slide, and they're inspired by the authors Lara and Rose and how they started their own company that creates food out of bugs. In the first book, the characters, Hallie and Jay, are partnered in a business class pitch competition where they come up with the idea of creating a sustainable protein startup. In the second installment, Pitch Partners, the 2 tweens are on to the next round of competition and are trying to get their tortilla chips made out of crickets into stores nationwide. We also have The Legend of Auntie Po, which is a gorgeous graphic novel by Xingyin Kaur. And it has a background with an environmental message. Our main character, May, lives in a Sierra Nevada logging camp in 1885. And this book shows her as she reimagines the American myth of Paul Bunyan, navigates burgeoning romantic feelings for her best friend, and the difficulty in politics of living in a lumber camp. This book was also shortlisted for the National Book Award this year. And then finally for me, we are talking about Strange Birds by Celia C. Perez. This is about a group of girls who form an alternative scout troop to try to change an age-old tradition of using rare, endangered bird feathers. This story has lots to look forward to, but one of my personal favorite parts is that there's a young bird watcher in the group. This is a great activity for all STEMinists out there, and reading this book will definitely pique, or should I say beak, your interest. Sorry, I wrote this script late at night last night, and there are some not great jokes in here.
Good job, Rachel. You definitely aren't winging it.
Oh, all the bird puns, more bird puns. Celia has a new book coming out this summer as well, Tumble, which we are so excited about. But now back over to Summer.
All right, so the books on the right side of the slide are coming out soon. So first we have The First Rule of Climate Club. In this companion to Carrie Firestone's Dress Coded, an 8th grader starts a podcast on climate activism and rallies her friends to create lasting change in their local community and beyond. Mary Kate and her friends really want this to happen. So when they start this podcast, they decide that it's time for the young people to lead and the leaders either to follow them or to get out of the way. Then Hanashu and the Ghost Crab Nation, which is perfect for fans of Dragon Pearl by Yoon-Ha Lee. This thrilling cinematic sci-fi novel follows Hanashu's mission to save herself and her friends from a dangerous plot to control their minds. In addition, this novel takes a fun and fascinating approach to climate change and the importance of sustainability, while critiquing the modern world's reliance on tech. And the world building is all based on Sylvia, the author's experience as a former environmental attorney. And finally, Fashionopolis. Did you ever think about where your jeans came from? The fabrics clothes are made out of, the way they are designed and sewn and shipped across the world, and the way we consume them and get rid of them. Every step in this process has a big impact on our environment, on the people who work in clothing factories, and on our cultures. This book, which is a nonfiction young reader's edition of an adult title, shows how the clothes we wear and throw away every day are made and what that means for the planet and for people around the world. Next slide.
Okay, so I labeled this slide as self-help, but I don't know that that's 100% accurate, so stick with me here. First, I'll talk about Rising Troublemaker, which is the young reader's version of Levy Ajayi Jones' Professional Troublemaker. This book talks about how we often feel like we're too much, but how we can use that feeling for good to be the troublemakers that we are or wish to be. As a rising troublemaker, you need to know that the beautiful, audacious life you want is on the other side of doing the things that will scare you. This book will help you face and fight your fears and start living that life ASAP. Then You Are More Than Magic is a guide for girls of color to find their voice and claim space as they prepare for either high school, college, or even their careers. This book comes from Minda Harts, who is the best-selling adult author of The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table. And this book has lots of practical advice, real-life anecdotes, questions for reflection, and further resources, all told to you by your wannabe big sister, Minda Harts. Next slide.
And next, Amanda Gorman. So just a little over a year ago, although it feels like longer, we all watched Amanda Gorman, the youngest inaugural poet in US history, read her original poem, The Hill We Climb. And she reminded the whole country that it was possible to have hope in the future, so long as we work toward it in the present. And we at Penguin Young Readers are so proud to have published 3 titles by her last year. Change Things is a picture book, it's a children's anthem, and it's a poem that reads like a song about a young girl that leads a cast of characters on a musical journey while they learn that they have the power to make changes, big and small, in the world, in their communities, and most importantly, in themselves. The Hill We Climb is a beautiful gift edition of the famous inaugural poem. And Call Us What We Carry is a luminous poetry collection which captures a shipwrecked moment in time and transforms it into a lyric of hope and healing. In it, Amanda explores history, language, identity, and erasure through an imaginative and intimate collage. Next slide.
So next up, I'm going to talk to you all about the 3 books that we had on the Rise, a Feminist Book Project Top 10 list. I'm going to read to you what the Rise committee said about each book because they've said it so succinctly and I truly could not do better. They spent the last year reading all of these books, so I think they know what they're talking about. So first is Lakshmi's Much. This is a body positive picture book about Lakshmi, an Indian American girl who learns to accept her heritage and her body hair after being teased about her much, which is Hindi for mustache. Bodies Are Cool, which celebrates the many shapes, sizes, colors, and patterns the human body comes in. All bodies are cool bodies. And Last Night at the Telegraph Club. In 1950 San Francisco, a lesbian bar called the Telegraph Club awakens Chinese American Lily Hu's queer self-discovery despite the duty she feels to her family and culture. And Last Night at the Telegraph Club is so highly awarded, you can barely see the cover past the stickers. It has been awarded the National Book Award, a Prince Honor, the Stonewall YA Award, the Apollo Award, the Walter Award, and I feel like I must be missing something. Next slide.
All right, and in addition to those top 10 books that Rachel mentioned, there are also quite a few other Penguin books that ended up on the Rise list. We're, again, as Rachel said, so proud because we really love this project. So I'll introduce you to some of these. Being You, which is a board book and provides a clear introduction to gender and the ways feminists work together to make the world fairer and safer for everyone. Nina. Nina Simone was a singing prodigy who used her talent to give voice to the anger and frustration of those fighting for racial justice. Letters from Cuba. In 1938, Polish-Jewish Esther builds a new life in Cuba after joining her father to help him earn enough to save the rest of their family from growing anti-Semitism. Samira surfs. Samira learns to surf so she can compete in a local contest while also learning to read and make new friends. And Perfectly Parveen. After she is dumped by her first boyfriend for being, in quotes, too much, 14-year-old Parveen Mohammed decides to remake herself into a quiet dream girl to get a date to homecoming.
Clearly, Parveen needed to read Rising Troublemaker, all about how you can use being too much to your advantage. Anyway, I'll talk about We Are the Ashes, We Are the Fire next by Joy McCullough, and just mention that this one came out in paperback yesterday. So after her sister's rapist is sentenced only to time served, M channels her rage and disappointment into a novel about Marguerite de Bracieux, a 15th century noblewoman turned knight. Then The Girls I've Been follows Nora O'Malley. Caught in a botched bank robbery, Nora, daughter of a con artist, must figure out how to save her friends using the skills she learned from her mother. Then When We Make It is about Puerto Rican 8th grader Sarai, who explores her Baruca identity and issues of religion, sexual assault, housing insecurity, and toxic masculinity in her gentrifying neighborhood of Bushwick, Brooklyn. And finally, on the nonfiction list, Chasing the Truth. Two New York Times reporters share the process and impact of their investigation of Harvey Weinstein's decades of predatory behavior and share with readers the tenets of investigative journalism. The next slide.
And along with being on the Rise list, I just wanted to talk about some of the other books in our first conversation series. So this is a board book series that eventually will also be in a picture book as well, but it started off as a board book series. So First Conversation is our new topic-driven read aloud series written by highly credentialed co-authors Jessica Rowley and Megan Madison, who are two experts in the fields of early childhood. Jessica is the coordinator of early literacy programs at Brooklyn Public Library, and Megan runs workshops on race, gender, and sexuality at the Center for Racial Justice in Education. The text in these titles is approachable and accessible, pitch perfect for this preschool age, and the perfect starting point for any caregiver open to starting this conversation. There's also a dedicated landing page online called firstconversations.com, where families and classrooms can find additional resources that can be used alongside the books to keep the conversation going. And next slide.
So since Summer just talked to you a bit about yes, no, we also have a few other picture books about consent for the youngest readers to tell you about. It's never too early to start these conversations, and we hope that these titles will help you bring the concept of consent to your youngest readers in a fun and digestible way. So Can I Give You a Squish is a sweet underwater story about a merboy who loves to give hugs. But not everybody wants a squish, or so our little merboy figures out. So he has to find a new way to show affection, and his whole group of friends demonstrates their preferred ways to be greeted. Plus, with this underwater theme, Can I Give You a Squish would make for a great read aloud during any Oceans of Possibilities summer reading programming. And then we have a personal favorite of mine, Don't Hug Doug. He doesn't like it. Doug is a normal kid who just doesn't like hugs. He'll give you a high five in an instant, but he just doesn't want to be squeezed. Some people love hugs, other people don't. And the only way to tell if someone likes hugs is to ask. This is a fun and funny story about bodily autonomy and consent and will be a hit with your readers. Plus, Don't Hug Doug and Can I Give You a Squish shows both sides of the spectrum. Someone who doesn't want to be touched and someone who just really wants to give everyone a squish. Next slide.
And we also have these 5 titles that focus on body positivity. 2 of them were mentioned briefly in the Rise list, but I'll talk about them again. Lakshmi's Mooch. So this adorable picture book is about a Indian American young girl who loves life, her family, and she loves school until a bunch of kids are playing at recess. And one of Lakshmi's friends says that she should be a cat because of the whiskers on her upper lip. And Lakshmi is very upset and extremely embarrassed. But when she tells her parents, they actually remind her that many powerful and amazing women in her family had mustaches or mooches, and that Frida Kahlo also even had hair between her eyebrows. So with newfound confidence, Lakshmi returns to school proud of her mooch and even draws some on some of the other kids in the class. This is at its heart a joyful book that highlights body positivity and self-confidence and features a modern Indian American family. And the other picture book is Bodies Are Cool. So this one's all about, as Rachel said, radical body positivity. It celebrates all bodies, no matter the shape, and does so with beautiful rhyming text. So apologies in advance, but I'm going to try and read some of this text because it's so great. So lanky bodies, squat bodies, tall, short, wide, or narrow bodies, somewhere in the middle bodies. Bodies are cool. Freckled bodies, dotted bodies, rosy patched or speckled bodies, dark skin swirled with light skin bodies. Bodies are cool. And then in our novel section, we have Starfish, which this Prince Honor, you see the little beautiful sticker on there. This Prince Honor winning title is one of, woohoo, yes, it's one of those books where after you read it, you instantly just want to give it a hug. It's just that kind of read. In Starfish, Ellie is tired of being fat shamed and does something about it in this debut novel in verse. So Lisa Phipps, who is the author, doesn't shy away from showing how cruel Ellie's relatives and classmates can be and how it affects her. And in the end, Ellie doesn't dramatically lose the weight, and her relationships with her family members aren't all resolved. Instead, the focus is on her progress toward learning to accept herself and be confident in her own skin. And Perfectly Parveen. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, Parveen has just been dumped only days after receiving official girlfriend status. Not only is she heartbroken, she's humiliated. So enter high school heartthrob Maddie, who just might be the smoking hot cure to all her boy problems. But since being herself hasn't really worked for her in the past, she decides that she's going to start acting like the women in her favorite rom-coms. Those women aren't loud. They certainly don't cackle when they laugh, and they smile much more than they talk. But Parveen discovers that being a rom-com dream girl is much harder than it looks. And finally, last book, TJ Powar Has Something to Prove, is coming out soon. And this charming rom-com about a high school debater, TJ Powar, who after becoming the subject of an ugly meme in her school, makes a resolution to stop shaving, plucking, and waxing and prove that she can be her hairy self and still be beautiful. But she soon finds that this might be her most difficult debate yet. Anyone who has ever struggled with facial or body hair will relate to TJ's journey and cheer her on, but this is particularly relevant for brown girls, how they're seen and judged and how they live in their bodies. The ups and downs TJ faces in attempting to prove her resolution deal with nuance, empathy, and respect for girls, no matter what they choose to do or look like, just like in Julie Murphy's Dumplin' and Leah Johnson's You Should See Me in a Crown. And as for Lakshmi Smooch, Bodies Are Cool, Starfish, and Perfectly Parveen, you can hear all of the authors of those books talk more in depth about their process in creating these books in the Booklist Feminist Reads webinar, which is on demand for viewing now. It's actually the one from last year. So it's all about body positivity, and these authors really had an incredible conversation. I highly recommend it.
Just to jump in about TJ Powar, it's one of my personal favorites. I went to an all-girls high school, and it was a point of pride for none of us to shave our legs. Like that was like the thing everyone did. And then when you did shave your legs, you just stuck your legs in every one of your classmates' like faces for the next month, being like, look at how smooth they are. It was just such a rite of passage for me. Now that you know too much about me, we can go on to the next slide. So now we're talking about picture book biographies of incredible women. All of these books are great for Women's History Month and just every single month. Just like Summer said in her introduction, I've learned so much from these picture book biographies. So let me tell you a bit more about them. Because Claudette is about Claudette Colvin, the teen whose activism launched the Montgomery bus boycott. This book not only goes into Claudette's actions, but talks about and celebrates collective action as well. One of the coolest things about this book, in my opinion, is how the idea was sparked. The author, Tracy Baptiste, was working on a book for older readers about Claudette and attended a dinner that celebrated Claudette. The incredible woman was there, and so were so many of her friends and family who all had something to say about how it was because of Claudette that their lives changed. It's a spectacular story, and here's a shameless plug. Tracy Baptiste tells it herself in a different Booklist webinar called Because Black Women, which you can watch the archived version of now. Hint, hint, do this after you finish watching this webinar. Thanks. Then the next one is the other book that was featured in that webinar, Nina, A Story of Nina Simone. Now, we've already talked about this one a bit as it was part of the Rise Feminist Reading Project list a couple slides back, but I wanted to reiterate how moving this book is and how incredible the illustrations from Christian Robinson are. Nina, A Story of Nina Simone, also received a Coretta Scott King Illustrator Honor this year, so it is absolutely not one to be missed. Then we also have Shirley Chisholm is a Verb. Shirley was the first Black woman in Congress, and she sought the Democratic nomination to be the President of the United States. She once said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. This picture book biography beautifully demonstrates how Chisholm was a doer and how her actions left a lasting legacy that continues to inspire, uplift, and instruct.
And next we have Dorothy the Brave, which was written by Megan P. Brown and illustrated by Brooke Smart. And this is another perfect biography to add to the shelves. Really, all of these are for readers who just can't get enough of learning about real people. I was one of those kids, so I would have loved all of these books. Dorothy Lucas heard the news of the bombing of Pearl Harbor and knew that she wanted to do her part. While her brothers joined the war effort, Dorothy also enlisted as a Women Air Force Service Pilot, or WASP. In this role, Dorothy trained as a pilot and with her fellow WASPs, towed targets through the air for male fighter pilots to train with. She risked her life through many mechanical scares and smoke-filled cockpits and did all she could to defy both gravity and the odds. Then Billie Jean. So Billie Jean, this is an incredible picture book biography written by Mara Ratcliffe and illustrated by Elizabeth Badley about Billie Jean King. It kind of starts off with Billie Jean as a kid who just doesn't really understand why things have to be the way they are. Why does she have to wear certain things? Why can't she play tennis with the boys? Why does she have to have her own little group? And kind of through the story, Mara's incredible text kind of shows how Billie Jean's, like, just how her spirit and how just basically her persistence and her relentlessness was actually able to really push her through so many different kind of things that happen in her life. And it goes through all the basically it goes through all of the incredible things that she achieved. It's one of my favorites because I mentioned earlier, love sports and just love anything that ends up with a woman going up against a man and winning. So, there we go. And then we have Sing With Me, which is a picture book biography of Selena Quintanilla. And young readers will be empowered by Selena's dedication, learning Spanish as a teenager, designing her own clothes, and traveling around the country with her family, sharing her pride in her Mexican-American roots and her love of music and fashion with the world. This book will also be published simultaneously in Spanish. And finally, Listen, how Evelyn Glennie, a deaf girl, changed percussion. And from the moment that Evelyn heard her first note, music held her heart. So begins the story of Evelyn Glennie, the first deaf woman to become a full-time solo percussionist. So Evelyn could hear as a kid, but began to lose her hearing at the age of 8 due to nerve degeneration. Everyone told her that because she was deaf, she couldn't become a musician, but Evelyn proved them wrong. Through percussion, she could feel the vibrations of the instruments in her body, listening to music in a different way. This biography, which is stunningly illustrated, is a testament to the power of music and how one woman's passion changed the minds of so many others. And next slide.
Okay, so this slide doesn't have a snappy headline, but I wanted to make sure we were all talking about these 3 YA novels with badass ladies at their center, plus a lovely picture book. So let's start with the picture book. So Always With You, Always With Me is a picture book by someone who you might know. Kelly Rowland is the incredible musical artist, actress, and more, who was also a founding member of Destiny's Child. This picture book is an ode to working moms everywhere. It's hard for a kid to be separated from their mom for a whole day, but this charming picture book reassures everyone that even though mom has to go to work, she's always with you. It also shows a fulfilled Black mom who has a career she loves and a family she loves, which is something we should all be celebrating. And then to the 3 YA novels. First is Practice Girl, which is about a girl whose entire way she views herself changes when she hears 2 words. Jo is looking for love, but when she overhears at a party that the boys she knows think of her as just a practice girl, also known as a girl who's good enough to hook up with, but not good enough to date, she's crushed. It immediately changes the way she sees herself and her relationships. In her quest to not let those 2 words define her, Jo begins unpacking uncomfortable truths about her relationship and begins to understand her real worth. This is a book that is heart-wrenching but relatable and ultimately triumphant, and features a strong girl who rejects her label and decides for herself who she is. Then The Bone Spindle is a gender-bent Sleeping Beauty retelling that meets Indiana Jones. This book is full of adventure, snark, romance, and found family. School Library Journal gave it a starred review saying, Vetter weaves compelling character backstories into a complex plot, rich with detail and magic, and balances heart-pounding action with romance, travel, and through world building. This gender-flipped retelling effortlessly melds romance, adventure, and fantasy. Highly recommend. And finally, The Sea Knows My Name by Laura Brooke Robeson. I think this book will sit perfectly alongside other badass pirate ladies like those in the Seafire trilogy and in Adrienne Young's Fable. Here we follow Thea Fowler, who has been raised by a ruthless pirate woman who knows that the only way for a woman to survive in a man's world is to make herself strong and invulnerable. Unfortunately, Thea is a soft-spoken, empathetic teen who can't live up to her mother's expectations. But as it turns out, her mother's way of doing things is not the only one, and a kind, gentle girl can live in a harsh world and make it her own. Next slide.
And next we have 3 books by authors who participated in previous feminist webinars that we partnered with Booklist on. So if you go back a few years, you'll definitely find Joy McCullough, Laurie Halse Anderson, and Yvette Dion webinars with all 3 of them. They were fantastic discussions, and I highly recommend them. So it's just to give you a little bit about each of these books in case you were unfamiliar. The first is Bloodwater Paint. So this is a stunning novel in verse about the Italian Baroque painter Artemisia Gentileschi. It's about how she learned to paint and how she tried to gain respect in her painting, but it is also about her because she is famous for being one of the first women to basically have a rape trial, which is kind of wild back in the day. She ended up winning because she was seen as property of her father, and the rapist was said to have damaged property, but she did win this rape trial, which is pretty incredible. And seeing what happened to her in the trial is also depicted in the book. It's fantastic and highly recommend it. Next, we have Shout, which is a poetry collection / memoir / manifesta, as Laurie calls it, which is written by Laurie Halse Anderson, who is the author of many, many books, including Speak. And in it, she starts with talking about her childhood and moves through her early adulthood, all the way through being a published author and talking to young people in schools and at events. And through it all, there's definitely a theme of speaking up and kind of getting louder and louder and wanting to amplify the voices of people who kind of read her book Speak and just we're still feeling silence. So she said, it's not time to speak anymore. It's time to shout. And finally, Lifting as We Climb, which is a nonfiction book that was, in addition to being a Coretta Scott King Honor author book, was longlisted for the National Book Award. And it is, as the subtitle suggests, about Black women's battle for the ballot box. This tells the story of Black women as a force in the suffrage movement, especially when fellow suffragists did not accept them as equal partners in the struggle. And that's it from me. I throw it back over to Rachel.
Thanks, Summer. And we will send around links to all of the webinars that we have mentioned in this, since I know we've shouted out quite a few, but we're very excited about them all. All right, that's it for us. That's the end of the book buzz. So now we're bringing it back around to She Persisted, and I'm going to hand things over to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Summer. We will now hear from Chelsea Clinton. Chelsea is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of She Persisted Around the World, She Persisted in Sports, She Persisted in Science, Don't Let Them Disappear, It's Your World, and Start Now, as well as Grandma's Gardens and the Book of Gutsy Women, which she wrote with Hillary Clinton, and Governing Global Health with Devi Sridhar. Chelsea earned a master's degree in public health from Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health, where she is now an adjunct assistant professor, and a PhD in international relations from Oxford University. She is also the vice chair of the Clinton Foundation, where she works on many initiatives, including those that help empower the next generation of leaders. She lives in New York City with her husband, Mark, their 3 children, and their dog, Soren. Without further ado, let's hear from Chelsea. Thanks so much for being here, Chelsea. It's such a nice thing to talk with you today.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's jump right into the questions. In speaking with other authors who cover lesser known figures or historical events, they often talk about a moment during their childhoods when they realized that what they were learning in school was far from the full picture. Do you have a similar experience from your own childhood like that? And can you tell us about it?
Yeah, Sarah, as you were asking the question, I was thinking about how really fortunate I was to have extraordinary teachers in the Little Rock public schools as a kid growing up. And, especially when I was at Horseman Junior High School, though it's now a middle school, there was a real kind of deep awareness, at least, as I experienced it as a kid, from the faculty about the historical significance, of Horseman. Horseman was one of the schools that the courageous Little Rock 9, the 9 Black students who integrated Little Rock Central High came from. And so these 9 students who left their all Black high schools to integrate Little Rock Central High School, which at the time was considered one of the best high schools in the country, and was all white. And the governor had shut down the school system to try to prevent integration, and President Eisenhower in 1957 had to deploy the 101st Airborne to effectively force integration of the school and the school system more holistically, and to protect the 9 Black students who were at the forefront every day kind of that integration fight. And so when I was a kid, I had teachers who were very proud of that history, really wanted us to understand that history, and also learned about a number of the kids who were, kind of historically part of the civil rights movement in our country, including Claudette Colvin and Ruby Bridges, who I am so honored to write about in the first She Persisted book. What really surprised me, Sarah, was when I got to Washington in the middle of 8th grade, how many of the students there, knew about, Rosa Parks, knew about, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and yet didn't know about, Claudette Colvin, didn't know about Ruby Bridges, didn't know about the Little Rock 9. And I think that for me was actually a really powerful experience of recognizing how I was now in this fancy private school, and how great an education I'd had at my Little Rock public schools, and also that I now had a responsibility to tell these stories. And yet I think because I was so taken aback that they didn't know these stories, I also, you probably couldn't have articulated this as an 8th grader, but think I had some kind of humility, curiosity to know, like, oh my gosh, there are probably lots of other stories I don't know, right? I was taught these stories, and I'm really surprised that my new classmates don't know these stories, but there are probably many other stories that I don't know, that I need to know. And that, of course, proved true then, and has proven true, over the many years since.
Yeah. So how do you choose who you profile in the series?
Oh, well, the first book is really personal to me. It's very much stories that I grew up with, my mom, my grandmothers, my teachers, kind of bringing these women into my life, or stories that I came to kind of later in life, but very much felt a personal connection to. Like I remember watching Sonia Sotomayor's hearing confirmation with my grandmother, and my grandmother was just like in awe of her. And I think so proud and grateful, happy that she had lived long enough where it was growing less exceptional to see exceptional women be nominated and then seated on the Supreme Court bench. The more kind of recent books are very much a collaborative effort where we ask for suggestions from across the kind of Philomel Penguin Random House family, and where I reach out to people that I know, other authors, but also depending on the kind of subject matter, athletes or scientists. And it's such a privilege then to like receive often hundreds of suggestions, and then to read through those, learn about women's lives, and then, try to think about kind of what stories I hope will really resonate with kids, across a real, broad spectrum of background and of achievement in the area we're focused on, but of course always with a view to persistence as being an important part of their stories as we kind of share those stories in the SHE Persisted series.
Yeah. And speaking of collaboration, you've worked with some really excellent children's literature authors in the longer books in the series. Did any of those writers help you see those subjects in a new light?
Oh gosh, I think all of them. I think, I learned from all of the SHE Persisted books, and it's so fun now. My daughter, who's 7, is reading the chapter books. She's reading the Nellie Bly book right now. And it's so great. So when she's like, "Did you know?" And I'm like, "Well, I did, but I love that you now know." I think one of the books that certainly has taken on, additional meaning for me is Christine Day's Maria Tallchief book. She herself, as a young, Native girl, loved ballet, took ballet in the kind of the Pacific Northwest Ballet, and kind of listening to her reflect on what it has meant to her to be able to write this story of kind of our first great American dancer, our first great kind of Native American Indigenous dancer, has meant a lot to me.
Kristen Day is a wonderful author. I really liked her middle grade novel that came out this past year.
Yeah.
So in speaking about the most recent book, SHE Persisted in Science, some of the concepts behind the work that these women did and continue to do are quite a high level. How do you approach distilling that down for a younger audience?
Oh gosh, lots of editing is probably the honest answer. Writing and then rewriting, and we always have kids now, admittedly, my 2 older kids, read the material so that there's always kind of kid eyes and not just adult eyes, on the text, so that it is compelling, of course, but also understandable. I think it is actually a good thing if kids have to look up one word. I don't think it's a good thing if kids have to look up, 4 or 5 words, on a kind of a page. So it's an iterative process, but it's never right kind of in the first go, but hopefully it gets there kind of through the process.
So your work outside of these books is very tied to public and global health initiatives. Do you see connections between that wider work and the writing you do for children, particularly in SHE Persisted in Science?
Absolutely. Both because of the, some of the women that I, write about in SHE Persisted in Science. You're thinking about, Dr. Flossie Wong-Stahl, whose work on HIV truly has helped save, millions of people's lives. But also her work on viruses more broadly has had real application to helping understand COVID-19 and helping scientists who develop the COVID-19 vaccines to be able to do their work. And so I see, kind of very real connections, like that, and ones that I think young readers will be particularly interested in because of how dominant COVID-19 has been in all of our lives, though especially their lives. I also, though, think it's really important because while there are many, many, many amazing women, in public health and global public health, whether we're thinking about kind of, vaccine discovery or kind of working at the World Health Organization, these spaces are still largely dominated by men, all over the world. And so I hope, with this book in particular, that young readers will see themselves, in the sciences, and then will be able to imagine themselves, as scientists, whether in public health, or in other fields. And I hope that for young boy readers, it also will become normalized to see women scientists, women researchers, kind of women leaders, in the sciences holistically. I think that's really important to me too, so that for little girls, kind of it helps, fuel their imagination for themselves and for their friends, and also for little boys that it helps kind of shape what they think of, as a scientist, as a researcher, as a leader in public health or in engineering or in architecture, in biology, in agriculture, kind of in any and every kind of thing that is science or touches science holistically.
Yeah. So speaking of inspirational figures, I do really appreciate that. I think about half of the figures you included in this type in She Persisted in Science are currently active and working in their fields, since so many biographies published for children often deal with historical figures who aren't around anymore. And I'm wondering if there are any other women or young or girls who are working in their fields currently that you wish more people knew about.
Oh gosh, I would say that I think the Girl Scouts actually does a great job of not only helping to provide opportunities for girls in the sciences, and their most recently kind of previous head was herself a rocket scientist, Sylvia Acevedo. So I think that probably really helped convey the Girl Scouts commitment to science. And I think that their Gold Prize and other recognitions are places certainly that I continue to look for kind of inspiration and then a window into the future. And for me, it was important, Rachel, Sarah, to include people who were working in science, but also working in many different areas of science. So, to include young activists who are pushing, whether kind of in Flint or sort of very local level or kind of at a global level, pushing for cleaner water, helping to be good science communicators. I think that sometimes we think of as secondary to the science, but I think as we all have experienced in COVID-19, actually being able to communicate what the science is telling us, be able to communicate often the uncertainty in the scientific process is really important, and I don't think should be thought of as secondary to kind of the hard part of kind of the science discovery or application processes, and also to include a wide variety of disciplines. So it was really important to me, and although she sadly is no longer living, to include Zaha Hadid, because architecture is very much a science, very much an applied science. And I see as a parent how my kids are fascinated by like the different buildings in New York City where we live, and kind of I want them to be able to connect that curiosity to science and kind of what they're learning, it's still a very young age, but like what they're learning in science class and math class. And so it was important to me for it to be kind of diversity of those who are no longer with us and those who are with us, those working in kind of a wide variety of fields, and also though very much working in fields that feel relevant to kids, whether it's connected to COVID-19 or it's connected to the built environment or it's connected to kind of clean water and climate change. And I hope that young readers will feel not only reflected in the book in a very kind of tangible sense, but also that their concerns and their questions, are reflected in the women's stories, and that hopefully then feels validating to them, in their questions and in their kind of thinking about science in their own lives and what they may want to be when they grow up.
Yeah, totally. One last question. Looking to the future of the series, can you tell us about some of the people you'll be profiling in further installments? Is there anybody who you're especially excited to write about?
Oh gosh, well, I'm really excited that we have more chapter books coming out this year. Some focused on women who are in the SHE Persisted in Science book, Rosalind Franklin and Temple Grandin, as two examples, both of which I'm really excited about. Partly for Rosalind Franklin because her work also very much kind of has been important in kind of the work of scientists today around COVID-19 and other viruses. Temple Grandin, because when I talk to kids about kind of what they care about, so many kids say animals. Ask, I've interviewed now truly hundreds and hundreds of kids about, what's on their mind, what's in their heart, like what are they concerned about, what do they want to work on? And so often, the answer relates to animals. Sometimes it's cats and dogs in their city. Sometimes it's, wild tigers, halfway around the world. Sometimes it's just marine wildlife. And sometimes it is farm animals. And so I'm really excited, that Temple Grandin's story is kind of being more fully told in the chapter book series. And also because I think that she's been such a pivotal force in this country and beyond this country to help people understand kind of what autism is and what it isn't, and kind of the different ways that people experience the world, learn about the world, and also can contribute to the world.
Great. Well, that was the last question I had for you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. It's been a real pleasure hearing about the series.
Sarah, thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the chance to talk about SHE Persisted in Science, and also the series more broadly, and to talk about some of the chapter books. And certainly we're loving reading them in our family. So I hope that they are enjoyed by anyone who picks them up anywhere.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rachel, Summer, and Chelsea. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars like the ones Rachel and Summer mentioned in their discussion today, and register for upcoming ones like those you see here. Not yet a subscriber? Pair the print reading experience with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of the special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. Patron-friendly, librarian-approved, and free with a Booklist subscription, Booklist Reader, Booklist's new digital-only magazine highlighting diverse readers' advisory recommendations for all ages, has arrived. To see and share the latest issue, visit booklistonline.com/reader-issues. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar, and one more huge thank you to our panelists and to our sponsor, Penguin Young Readers. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.